I've chosen to create designs for Phoebe Bridges' second studio album, Punisher. Her past two albums have discussed themes of contemplating existence, emotional detachment, and family-related trauma. But for Punisher in particular, the strongest theme seems to be about approaching the end of times and accepting the idea of death. The last track of the album, titled I Know the End, is a significant track that encapsulates the album perfectly. I used I Know the End as an anchorage to my visual interpretations of this album. These clips are taken from the music video. It extends the narrative by visualizing metaphors of witnessing death, running towards it, being initially angry with it, and finally flirting with death. Before moving on to the iterations, as usual, I had to consider the target audience, which led to contextual research of notable artworks such as a fun twist of psychedelic and pop art created by Brandon Parvini for Ice Cube's concert visuals, this glitchy collage created by Graham Goldberg for Big Red Machine's record, a monopen illustration by Ashes57 for Wu-Tang Clan's album, this intense color manipulated photography created by Miles Johnson for Here We Go Magic's album, and some posters that promote music events created by DKNG Studios. With my mood board, I first gathered visuals that captured the feeling of listening to the album. Later on, I looked up different visual styles to explore my first three iterations. I explored the monopen style to illustrate a spooky yet whimsical illustration. This represents the chaos and ruin of American families as viewed by their younger generation. The stereotypical American house with a pickup fence is no longer seen as a mark of success, but a breeding ground for trauma and nightmares. This style was easy to accomplish and is very convenient to produce. It doesn't need much editing as long as the layout is established early on. To improve on this artwork, I'd draw the elements at a smaller scale to fit more imagery that reflect the narrative. I'd also add some detail lines and varying stroke widths to create more organic and doodle-like quality. Illustration plays on the idea of romanticizing an escape from normal life. Created using Illustrator and Photoshop, the execution for the color and texture was quickly done, but I ran into trouble with the layout, and in the end, the art style didn't feel like a reflection of the record. This exercise aims to create an illustration that could be used alongside a photographic element without the two elements appearing disconnected from each other. I used a royalty-free image for this exercise, which wouldn't be a part of the final artwork, and applied a gradient map to make it into the reference image. Using Procreate, I focused on different brushes and blending methods to use in the illustration. I only used the 4 colors that I have picked for the gradient map in the reference image, which made it difficult to adjust or recolor the artwork if I wanted to go with a different color scheme. Later on, I discovered it is better to draw in grayscale and to add the gradient map afterwards. Using a brush with soft edges and later blending different shades together on their edges was an efficient method. Though the initial illustration looks too smooth and the blending of some edges looks sloppy, once a grain filter is added, it blends well together and enhances the thermal quality. I then started to do design for the front cover. This time around, the illustration is done in grayscale, so the color can later be adjusted using gradient maps and light curve tool. This gave me more flexibility for color exploration since I haven't made a definitive decision on the color palette. At first, the photographic element appears displaced compared to the other illustrated elements. To fix this, I used Lightroom to reduce the texture and noise of the photograph to match the illustrated skeleton. Using Photoshop, gradient maps are applied separately to each layer and slightly adjusted to achieve a more harmonious color balance. This is my interpretation of how the artist views her imminent mortality and her own reflection. I took advantage of the monochromatic color palette to extend the storytelling. Initially, I wanted to make the human features vibrant and well saturated, while the death features are desaturated. But I thought it would be fun to reverse that concept since the artist embraces death and sees it as a way of feeling more alive. So now the human features are desaturated and death features are very vibrant. The vibrant colors glow and gradually extend to the human finger as a representation of her excitement in approaching death. I experimented with font pairings and customizing the typography. I used a modern serif font called Mallory as the primary type and a decorative font called Galahad as the secondary. I thought Mallory had a good contrast in its stroke widths and its clean edge strokes is effective as a display typeface. Galahad has characteristics that match the record's sound, and since the tracklist wouldn't be a large body of text, the typeface's rugged edges wouldn't interfere too much with legibility. I defined the typography layout before the illustration process and decided to design the composition around the type. I decided to use the theme of mirrors again to relay the visual context, mostly because I'm aware that the front cover is somewhat ambiguous and may not be interpreted as a mirror for those that lack context. The design process was very similar, with a lot more of photoshopping because of the amount of illustrations. I've gone through many options for the imagery as I tried to choose the best combination of digital illustrations and photographs. I was surprised with how the gradient map effect made it easy to use photos that weren't taken in a professional manner. There was so much flexibility since the imagery doesn't call for hyperrealism. After contemplating the different options, I was happy with the final set of images I used for the back cover, as it really felt like an extension of the front cover without being repetitive. I decided the poster should be similar to the back cover as it has more to offer for a portrait dimension compared to the front cover. I produced multiple options of the layout, but because I still couldn't decide on which one was the most effective, I decided to add the imagery to all 3 different layouts. The final design was chosen for the best balance of tonality, as the other 2 seemed to be overcrowded. Though the process took very long, it was worth going through it because I wouldn't have been able to see this outcome from the options of the layouts. Overall, I had so much fun doing this project, especially with the challenge of having to create every single imagery in the designs. If I could do this all over again, I would be more consistent in the visual style, either using all photographic images or all digital illustrations for the objects inside the mirror, but I really wouldn't have come to that insight without all of these experimentations. But I guess that's a lesson learned for future projects.